I've never felt that my race was a disadvantage in what I am doing.
Hi, I'm Leila Tehran. I'm an Iranian living in London, and I have been vegan for over 6 years.
My name is Devon Bennett. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've been vegan for 4 years.
So you're a personal trainer and you're a fitness coach at Plant Strength Performance.
All the coaches are vegan, and all the ambassadors are vegan, and the company only coaches vegan or only gives vegan meal plans and such. I had a close friend go vegan who was a huge meat eater, which is kind of what opened my mind up to it a little bit more. In my head, when the idea of going vegan first came to me, I was thinking, oh, what kind of health benefits could I get from this possibly? But in order to motivate myself to stick to it, I went and went on YouTube and just actually watched some factory farming videos, because in my head I was thinking, well, I knew it was awful. Like, I knew what I was going to see was awful, so it would probably get me to stay disciplined with the transformation. But the thing is, when I watched those videos, pretty much, after only 20 minutes of watching videos, I think the video I watched was specifically on pig factory farming. Mm-hmm. It immediately became an ethical thing. It hit me very emotionally. I actually just threw a lot of the meat I had in my fridge out right then. And that day I went vegetarian, actually, not vegan, but 5 months later I went vegan. Even though my health curiosity sparked it, I am vegan entirely for animal reasons. It's kind of interesting because when I think back on it, I wasn't very educated in terms of what was healthy and what wasn't. For some reason, I just assumed that vegan was healthy off no real basis. I didn't read anything. That first 3-4 months of being vegetarian and vegan, it wasn't the most ideal diet. I mean, I was eating like really bland sandwiches. That was like half my diet, was just bread with vegetables in between.
A lot of people, when they go first vegan, it's almost like you don't have any guidance what you can eat. And it also shows how much meat or dairy products we were having before going vegan, isn't it?
I was only eating eggs, dairy, meat, and bread, and occasionally rice and beans. That was my entire diet growing up. I think I ate more vegetables in my first half year being vegetarian and vegan than my entire life up to that point. Like, I didn't have a healthy childhood. I didn't eat vegetables. 4 months into being vegan, I was still in college at the time, and I joined my vegan club at the college, and we went to Veg Fest together in Atlanta, and I saw Dr. Greger speak in person. I didn't even know who he was back then, and that was my first real insight into maybe some of the, like, just how healthy a vegan diet can be and what are some of the benefits of it.
So how did your family react when you told them, look, I'm gonna go vegetarian or vegan?
My family's reaction was pretty good. I mean, my family also kind of had the weird assumption that what I was doing was at least healthy. So they were just happy that I was eating it in a healthier way. But they also thought it was a phase. My dad will still be like, but come on, Devon, fish, or at least fish or something like that. And they would, there was a lot of vegan jokes at first. Like, if my family had a cookout or something, they'd be like, oh, Devon, there's grass outside. So there was a little bit of that, but there wasn't any like extreme negativity to the lifestyle. I never felt any resistance. My parents are Caribbean, so they grew up on lots of meat. There was a period where both my sister and my mom did try vegetarian, which was insane for them to even do, but ultimately their diet is pretty much the same. They do cook some vegan meals now, but yeah, no one in my family changed. I had some friends change, but not family. I had two close friends go vegetarian, and I have people on social media who I don't know who tell me they went vegan, and I help them.
How do you actually try to promote veganism?
I think the way in which to promote veganism is heavily dependent on the context and the audience that you're talking to. I don't think there's any one way that's best, of course. Veganism should technically be only an ethical position. That's what it kind of really means. Everything else is really plant-based eating. So when I convince someone to eat plant-based, am I actually convincing them to be vegan? My page is obviously a lot focused on nutrition. I know that if someone's already eating plant-based or predominantly plant-based, that they're much more open to being able to even think about animal well-being, because there's less conflict of interest there. There was some study where they actually they asked people to evaluate the moral value of a cow or something while they were eating a burger versus while they were eating nuts, and there was a distinction there. So we know that if we can get people to eat more plant-based, that they're already going to be more susceptible to the ethical arguments. So with that in mind, I think for the most general public, plant-based health and nutrition might be a very good way to do it. As vegans, we so desperately want to change the reality that's in front of us when it comes to animals, because it's terrible, right? The amount of suffering is unbelievably high, and as a emotional, caring human being, all you want to do is change that as quickly as possible. And I think when I first went vegan, I was a little bit more naive, and I thought that maybe I can change the world quickly, help change the world quickly. Maybe this is really something that's about to explode. But as time has gone on, I start paying attention, and just go to rural southern United States, and you'll realize how far we are from a vegan world. Especially a vegan world which is vegan specifically because of compassion for animals. Once you accept that as kind of like a probable reality, the next question is okay, well, what's the fastest route to a plant-based world? And it might be something that involves 100 years of activism and different forms of advocacy, or more than that, actually.
I think one of the first things is to, like I said, educate, not necessarily that it needs to be promoted. I think we just have to help our communities understand that we already have ties to plant-based eating, vegan lifestyle, and the ethics of veganism. I also think, along with the education, we can talk about how a lot of the issues that come from exploiting animals negatively impact our communities. So whether it be the high rates of lactose intolerance for people of color that disproportionately affect us, environmental racism, and how these slaughterhouses are placed in our communities, and it impacts our quality of life, our air quality, our water quality, and how slaughterhouse workers are mostly coming from situations where they have been in prison, or just don't have as many opportunities in life. I do think we have to let people know, especially when we're talking to people of color, just to let them know that, hey, because we are oppressed and because we have been systemically oppressed, it's on us to also understand that our actions can still oppress others. And we don't need to perpetuate that type of oppression on others. Be the best versions of ourselves at all times as much as we can. And I think we can make those connections and have those conversations, but it definitely has to be a nuanced conversation where we don't ignore people's feelings and trauma, but we also let them know the responsibility that their personal individual actions have on others also.
If you truly care about veganism as a movement, then you need to care about your health, because it reflects the movement itself. If vegans are falling out with bad health, then it's going to reflect badly on the movement. And yeah, that's incredibly important. And I don't know, sometimes I'm really confounded with some of these people. Like Miley Cyrus is a good example. I can't even fathom being an ethical vegan and not just going to try to figure out your issues in a plant-based context, but also deciding to, in the most publicly way possible, claim that it was veganism that you had to leave because of your health, without really making sure that was true. If you really cared about animals, it's kind of confusing to me. Even if she truly believed like she needed fish to be healthy, you think she would at least, keep it to, I don't know, keep it a little bit more on the down low.
We always keep saying, if you have a cold, all the non-vegans are going to say, oh yes, it's because of your vegan diet. I'm just wondering, are we doing the same?
It's because of this, even no matter what, the majority of the world is still not vegan, and we're always going to be subconsciously at some level doubting our vegan diet. If everybody else in the world is not following what we're doing, I think it's just like a natural human tendency to just jump to the conclusion that if you have any health issue, that it must be your diet, which might also be kind of rooted in the assumption that people think they can't have health problems on a vegan diet. Like that assumption leads to when they do have health problems, they blame the diet. So people need to realize that you can have health issues on a vegan diet. And if you do, maybe it has to do with nutrition, but if it does, then you can probably solve that without quitting plant-based eating in its entirety. The majority of people who come to me and say veganism is too expensive, they actually can't afford it. They're being unrealistic with how expensive they think it is. Veganism at its most expensive is when you really maximize the amount of like substitute type foods you get, or like more rare things like tempeh and seitan. Like those things are kind of expensive, obviously, but you don't need those things. You don't need vegan ice cream, plus it's not healthy for you anyway. When you really break it down, I haven't been convinced entirely that an omnivorous grocery trip is inherently more expensive or inherently cheaper than a vegan grocery trip. A lot of those people are just misinformed, I feel like, or they have a misconception about how expensive it really is. And yes, if you eat organic, it'll get a little bit more expensive, but you probably weren't eating organic anyway. If you eat organic on an omnivore diet, it's more expensive too. So that's my first point, that the expenses aren't that different. But I do think there's still a connection, obviously, between standard of living and whether or not you go vegan, just because people who are more comfortable have the mental space to actually start thinking about more altruistic things in the first place, or even thinking about their health. It's like Maslow's a hierarchy of needs kind of thing, If you're still struggling to get your basic needs met, you're not thinking about the well-being of animals. You're probably not even thinking the well-being of other humans around you, depending on how low you are on that hierarchy. It's once you have the basic needs of like food, shelter, and then even the next level of needs like just self-esteem and love and stuff like that, that then you open up and you start to, your sphere of compassion increases, and now you think, oh, like let me eat in a way that's better for the planet or for the animals. I think it is more of just a standard of living thing. I come from Atlanta, Georgia, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with Atlanta, but it's kind of like, they call it the Black Mecca. We have more Black people with middle income than any other place in the United States. And I don't think as a coincidence, we also are the only place I know has the most Black vegans.
I think experiencing oppression in our lives makes us more empathetic to other people's oppression, including non-human animals. The challenge I see is that the vegan advocacy movement has been very white as a professional movement, and the materials produced are produced from that perspective. And when folks who are not part of that inner circle interact with those materials, we feel excluded by it. In my own life, I have found that so many people care deeply about the other, and whatever that other is, caring for other people because we know the pain ourselves. We ourselves have felt it. We have a family member who's been excluded, who's been stopped at the border, etc. We live it day in and day out, and that makes it easier for us to imagine other people suffering, other animals suffering. I would love to see the animal advocacy movement become more global in perspective and scope, develop more empathy for the other kinds of oppression that we know exist in this world. Instead of asking, Black people to care about animals as if we didn't, let's ask animal advocates to care about Black people, expand the circle of compassion.
My best friend growing up was a pseudo-vegan vegetarian, and she spent our entire friendship, every once in a while she would bring up animal cruelty. Maybe that actually planted the seeds for me making the decision later on, and why I knew the factory farming would be bad. When I think back on why I wasn't receptive to that, I think ultimately it wasn't a matter of argument. It was just a matter of me just being mentally ready to make a serious change. Like, it had to be extremely an intrinsic decision. Back then, my conception of vegan was like someone who just eats spinach all day. I feel like it's much more effective to try to create a world where it's set up so that future generations find it very easy to go vegan than trying to convince older generations who've already been indoctrinated. If we continue to make plant-based eating more popular and more vegan options, and veganism becomes more in the mainstream, then the generations, after me and even after that, it'll find veganism so easy that the ethical argument will become, too obvious to ignore.
Hi, I'm Ali Bani Asad from Mashhad, Iran, and I've been vegan for almost 4 years now.
Language is very important. It helps us shape our thoughts, actually. Our thoughts shape which words we use, and our words shape what thoughts we produce. The term that we use in the United States more commonly is people of color. In and of itself, it defines people with relationship to whiteness. You are not white. It is a deficit. You are of color. And that is problematic in and of itself, and it shapes our thinking to continue to think in terms of deficits, what we are not. The term people of the global majority focuses on the strength of people like me, like you, to be representative of the vast majority of people around the world. And what does that mean to think in terms of strength now? And to be defined by our own characteristics, not in juxtaposition with whiteness. Language really can have a powerful impact in how we move forward.
I've never felt that my race was a disadvantage in what I am doing in the vegan community. Yeah. If anything, it's actually been might even be a little bit of an advantage, just because there's so many white vegans that being a Black vegan makes me just like 10% more unique. So people are just more interested. Maybe it is harder to make a living if you have a niche of vegan cooking or whatever, vegan anything, and your main target audience is maybe a certain ethnicity. So maybe if I was only trying to target to the Black community, maybe I would have more trouble.
The example that you gave of your the cook, she's experiencing sexism and racism combined. That combination in the United States is what was originally coined as the term intersectionality. It was about the particular marginalization of Black women in the healthcare system. We experience these interconnectedness all throughout our lives. Athletes of color have developed a certain prestige in the United States for sure, but even the top Black athletes talk about how they're not the ones owning teams. They're not the ones profiting the same as the managers and the owners from the business of sports.
But in terms of like high level, like systematic racism, I don't know how I went through my whole life not experiencing it. Some people will think like, oh no, you experienced it. You're just blind to it. It's like, nah, I never felt like I never felt like my race was a disadvantage in any situation. I don't know what makes that distinction between me and some other Black people in America. It definitely depends on where you're living as well.
You said you actually grew up in a diverse community.
Yeah.
Can you think of something which actually protected you against the discrimination, maybe?
Growing up in the diverse community was the protection. And when I say diverse, I don't mean just like white and Black. I mean, it was like a perfect melting pot of like white, Hispanic, Black, Middle Eastern, whatever. Race just never really came up in my childhood for the most part.
We are all born into this society, which is a racist society, white supremacist society, where whiteness is prioritized. And we come and we accept it. I think youth protects us from feeling like we've experienced racism. Like, I was actually having a conversation with my 13-year-old son last week. And he said, I haven't experienced racism. It exists, but my parents have protected me from the worst cases of it. So that's his 13-year-old perspective. I can tell him that indeed he has experienced it, but as his parent, I fight the fights with the education system, with the health system on his behalf. And so what he experiences is being protected by me, but I feel the brunt of having to advocate for my Black child.
And it's funny you mentioned Austria, because when I try to think of the closest thing to racism that I experienced was when I studied abroad. It was when I was crossing the Italy-Austria border, and they actually, I was with a group of all my white friends, and they stopped only me to check my passport because they were worried that I was brown. That was the closest thing to racism. And I grew up in, middle class, so my parents were well off. I never had any financial trouble, so I could live in a nice neighborhood and I could go to a decent school.
There is certainly a benefit to having more financial resources, and those benefits could be experienced by people of any racial group. However, white privilege is not the same as economic privilege. White privilege is the benefits that white people receive because of their race through no work of their own. We all know people who are very, very hard workers, and they get far in their lives, and we attribute their success to their own individual efforts. However, that doesn't apply to everyone uniformly. Research shows that people with African American sounding names are less likely to be screened for jobs. They get screened out very early on when the resumes still first sit in front of the recruiter's computer. And so white privilege is not questioning your abilities or your talents or your skills because there's an inherent benefit associated with whiteness. And it sits on top of any qualifications that the person might have. It protects them from discrimination. It protects them from being excluded in certain situations. It gives them the benefit of the doubt in other situations.
Somebody actually told me, oh, why are you talking about BLM? You're white.
It's kind of funny that people would say that even if you were white, that you wouldn't be able to speak on issues that other races are facing. And it kind of ties into animal rights advocacy, because there's a difference in perspective when you are speaking on behalf of somebody else versus when you are the person being oppressed. Mm-hmm. And as animal advocacy or animal activists, we're put in a situation where we can only speak on behalf. Animals, can't form an argument, and there's a difference in perception. Every other social justice movement at least had the oppressor also speaking, or the person being oppressed also speaking out, and we can't actually have that. And
so this movement is about the animals, and we are animals too, but we are not the non-human animals that we're advocating for. Typically in social justice movements, these movements are led by beings that are fighting for their own social justice. So if you look at movements like Black Lives Matter, or if you look at the women's movement, you look at the LGBTQ community, there's a strong presence of people from their respective backgrounds advocating for their rights and for equality and for equity. The animal rights movement is unique in the fact that the beings that are being advocated for aren't the ones that are actually doing the advocating. So it's not cows and pigs just fighting for their own rights. It's humans that are trying to advocate for their rights. So it's incumbent upon us to understand how our racial dynamics and how our power structure amongst ourselves plays out in our effectiveness and our advocacy for the animals. So we can't just ignore, the systemic issues that have persisted, if Black and brown people don't feel invited or don't feel as welcomed. So we just have to let people know that since the animals aren't the ones that's fighting for themselves, we have to address a lot of the issues within our own structure if we're going to be effective for them.
Your average, like low income, or maybe even your middle income American, Black American, or minority in America, and you look at veganism and you see mostly white people, obviously that's going to have some type of psychological effect on you considering taking that route. Having role models and examples that who are come from the same background as you is obviously important for you to even consider a lifestyle. That's why people like Tabitha Brown are important. We need more of her. And we need a version of her for every type of culture and person out there, basically. I think that's what will kind of grow the sub-vegan cultures that aren't so white-centered.
I think anytime any movement is only represented by one group or one faction, is going to limit the progress that is made because, to our earlier points, all of these oppressions are intertwined. So if we have movements that only look a certain way, that are only represented by a certain voice, by a certain class, then it really limits how effective we can be because it limits the amount of perspectives, involvement. There's so many nuances that come with addressing so many social justice movements. And that's why we need a diverse mentality. We need a diverse body of people and beings. I had one activist friend tell me, the revolution is going to be led by people who are, well rested and happy and, vibrant. It's not, our anger, it will fuel us, but we don't wake up angry, happy. Nobody wakes up and is happy to be angry. That isn't going to be able to propel you into a better society. We need people that have mental clarity, are able to think straight, are focused, and are happy, and are able to speak to a variety of people, are comfortable around a variety of people. So we need all hands on deck, not just certain ones.
If you ask me my favorite food, I can definitely tell you that it's chickpeas. Like I just throw like chickpeas with like broccoli and bell peppers and a bunch of spices, and I just throw it in the oven, soy sauce.
It was lovely to talk to you. I really enjoyed it.
Nice to meet you too.